Hello, it's Bill, the knee pain guru. Welcome to the Ask Dr. Beck show, brought to you by the Comella Foundation. Good morning, Charlie. How are you?
Good morning, brother. I am doing okay.
Good.
Let's see. I just sent you the presentation.
We're going to do a presentation on the foot. We're going to talk about primitive retained reflexes. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Excellent. There it is. Let me bring this up here. Primitive retained reflexes in the foot. Okay. I'm not sure if my computer's running slow or the attachment didn't come through. I can see it, like the little paper clip.
Yep.
Well, I am. Is it a big document? And there it is.
No.
I got it.
Got it. Okay.
Great spirits have often encountered violent opposition from weak minds. Einstein. I like your quote in your email.
Yes.
Okay.
Gives me strength every day.
We need it. We need it. Okay. Let me share the screen. Okay, here is the document. Retain primitive reflexes for the foot.
All right. That's the whole thing. You got it. Okay. All right. So if we keep it simple, a reflex is something that the body needs to know how to do before you understand the language that you're born into to be able to learn it. Okay. So for example, playing piano is not a reflex, but breathing is a reflex, and learning how to walk is a reflex. So each of the skills that we need to have, being able to take our first feeding from mom or a bottle, being able to take our first breath, being able to take our first step, they are put together by reflexes that we share with other animals. And those reflexes build the ability to perform a task. Okay, so we're talking about the foot. Primarily, we're going to talk about walking and how these reflexes, when they come in, do their job, and how if they're retained in you and I as adults, they can interfere with us being able to walk. So there are 70 defined reflexes. All of them, again, do something for us. They're supposed to fade into the background. Really, as we reach childhood, we go from an infant to a child. Those reflexes are supposed to be in the background. But they can be retained. And if they're retained, quite frequently, if you find one, you're going to find more than one. The ones that are the most important, because they're what's called the gatekeepers, if they are there, then there are usually other reflexes that are present. That is the fear paralysis reflex, the first one that we develop, and the Moro reflex. The Moro reflex in an adult makes every move that you make stiff, and you have to fight that. Okay? So if you find anything we're talking about today, fear paralysis and Moro reflex are likely present, and you need to address those first before you address the other stuff.
Okay, real quick question. You said there's 70 of these reflexes in the body or in the foot, or what? Where
no, in the body. In the body.
In the body. So we're going to talk about a couple here in the foot? Okay.
Yes, we're going to talk about 5 that occur in the foot. All right. So, next slide there. This basically is just a map of the foot from the bottom, giving you the anatomy. Okay, and that's all. It's there for your information only. Then we can go to the next one. Okay, so The first thing we have is something called the stepping reflex. And basically, roughly at 6 months of age, you pick a baby up by their midsection, you put them in a standing position, and place their feet on a hard surface. So changing table, whatever it is. What they do is they point their toes and they start to march. One foot goes up while the other one is down. They are starting the basic mechanics of learning how to walk. Okay, and so this occurs long before we stand and wobble and take our first step. So this reflex, what it does is it points the toes. Okay, and just anatomically, the bottom of the foot is called the plantar surface. So when we move the foot toward the bottom, it is called plantar flexion. Mm-hmm. The top of the foot is the dorsal surface. And so when we move the foot up toward the head, the toes up toward the head, it's called dorsiflexion. Mm-hmm. So normally, if we were standing, and I'm going to take you now from standing, I'm going to lay you on the table. Your foot is at 90 degrees to the leg. Mm-hmm. So in the picture here, that's the solid picture, not the kind of lighter one that goes up and down. Right, but so that's the solid picture right there. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So the stepping reflex makes you point your toes. It takes you into plantar flexion. That's the one that goes down. Okay. Mm-hmm. Which basically means that unless your ankle is completely fused, everyone on the planet should have that motion. Mm-hmm. When you put your hand across the bottom of the foot, again, you're laying down. So I'm going to put my hand across the bottom of your foot, and I'm going to try to push your toes and your foot up towards your head. If I meet resistance, that means you have a retained stepping reflex. Mm-hmm. The reflex is keeping you from moving your foot and your toes into dorsiflexion. Okay, that's what it means. The reflex is retained. Mm-hmm. What it also means is that you're going to primarily walk on your toes because your toes are being pressed down. That's mm-hmm. what the reflex does. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm not going to go into treatment. This is more just trying to figure out between, let's say, you and your significant other or a friend, if you've got these reflexes, because for most of us, our arms aren't long enough to reach our feet.
Right.
Okay. So if the toes go down and not up, the foot goes down and not up, that's a retained stepping reflex. If it moves in both directions, that stepping reflex is integrated. And mm-hmm. we can move to testing the second reflex. So next slide.
Oh, I have a question for you around dorsiflexion, and you were saying our arms aren't long enough. Can this reflex only be tested when the leg is straight? Is that the essence of it?
Can it only be tested? The direct answer is no. You can test it any way that you want.
Right.
But it is much harder to palpate the nuances if the leg is flexed, because other things can allow the leg to move. So this is easiest if we do it with you, the patient, laying on your back, and someone else does it for you.
Uh-huh. Got it. Okay.
Okay. So the next reflex is called the heel reflex. And so what happens is the stepping reflex teaches us to put our toes down. But without the heel reflex, we would only walk on our toes. The heel would never touch the ground. Mm. So the heel reflex is the opposite of the stepping reflex. It teaches us to put our toes on the ground. And when the heel reflex is integrated, this is what I tell all my younger patients, you can be a ninja. You literally can walk around silently. When the heel reflex is not integrated, you sound like a baby elephant walking down the hall because the heel gets pushed into the ground and it's very hard for you to control it. So that's the way that from an auditory sense, you can tell if someone has this before you even test.
Got it.
But I drew the arrow very specifically in its location. If I move the arrow more toward the bottom of the page, when I actually push on the foot, I'm going to be plantar flexing the foot, and it will feel like the heel moves only because the ankle is a hinge. If I press at the ankle, so that's where the arrow is, and I meet resistance when I push, so there's no spring, that basically means that the heel's been pushed down and it's fighting me in my ability to get it tested to make it go up. That's a retained heel reflex. If the heel moves up on its own, so I push on it, it's got a little give, the heel reflex is integrated, and it's likely that you can walk silently.
Uh-huh.
Okay?
Question for you. What would show up in a person's body? What would they notice? Obviously, the person with the retained the reflex in the foot where the heel doesn't give is going to sound like an elephant. If the one for the dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, that's going to be more them walking on their toes. What would be the things that they would have issues with in their body? Possible. I know there can probably be a laundry list of things.
There's a laundry list, but let's go with issues that you would notice. The spectrum could range from absolutely none. Let's just say that it's been there for your entire life and you've never known the difference. So you may notice nothing at all. To if it's the stepping reflex, you scuff your foot along the ground because every time you lift it, your body wants to point the toes down. With the retained heel reflex, for example, you scuff your heel. And so if we were in a place where, I don't know, we'll make up a scenario here where I've got people marching in front of me, okay? Military or not, it doesn't matter, but literally everyone's walking in step and I've videotaped them. I'm going to begin to see the subtle differences in how people lift their feet. Now, years ago when I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, there was a running store that when you bought new shoes, they put you on a treadmill. There was a camera behind the treadmill. They would make you run and they would film your feet. I wasn't in medical school then. This is long before I got into medical school. And my guess is now, with the knowledge that I know, I could watch those feet move up in the air and see how they move in space and tell you if there's a retained reflex. Only because the reflex is going to drive the foot when it's in space.
Is there, I would imagine that watching different people walk, it's going to be all over the board as far as walking on their toes, walking on their heels. Is there degrees of primitive reflexes retained in the foot? Or is it just like, is it on or off, like a light switch?
So I'm going to have to split hairs and say that both are correct. A reflex technically is integrated, which means it doesn't show up at all, or it is retained. And if it's 1% retained, it's still retained. If it's 100% retained, it's still retained.
Got it. Okay.
People will have different, I hesitate to use the word strengths, but a different strength of how much the reflex shows up. Some people, it's very subtle. Some people, it is very, very pronounced.
And that's their ability of their body to compensate for the reflex that exists?
That makes sense to me. I haven't done enough study in looking at how other people view the reflexes to really get a grasp on how to answer that question.
Yeah, because my own experience with, let's say, moving in the woods, stalking and moving in the woods silently and things like that, there's this place where, depending on what's going on with feet or ankles or, shins, calves, there are times where I have to fight tension patterns that are going on to move easier. Sometimes it's easier to move than others for whatever
Correct.
reason.
Yes.
So anyhow, that's just where my brain is going as you're presenting this.
Yep.
Okay, next slide.
Next slide. Okay, so this one has a name. It is very important not to confuse the name. It's named after the person who founded it. His last name was Babinski. And there is a Babinski sign, which indicates very bad neurological brain damage and you're near death. Or there is a Babinski reflex. Don't get the two confused. Okay. So as we look here, we've got two colored arrows and they define how the foot is supposed to move. Again, if I lie you on your back, I take my hand, I grab the top of your foot. If I move the outside bottom of your foot toward the middle of your body, okay, so that's the red arrow. I'm moving in that direction, the outside. That is called inversion. Okay, if I take your big toe and the inside part of your foot and I move it toward the outside, that's the blue arrow, that is called eversion. Okay, now a normal person has degrees of that motion both in inversion and in eversion. That's normal. The foot can move and adapt. As we grow inside mom, let me see if I can get my hands in front of my camera. We start with our feet like this, more or less touching. And as we mature, our feet turn so that as we're born, the bottoms of our feet face away from our body. What we learn in osteopathy is that any kind of trauma causes you to regress, to go backwards along embryologic lines. So we're born like this. We have trauma and our feet move so that literally the outside of the foot is where I put my force. Okay. That is called a Babinski reflex. It's a retained Babinski reflex. So you're going to walk on the outsides of your foot, not flat. The easy way for most of us to look for that is to grab a pair of well-worn shoes and see where the wear is. In theory, it should be even. If that wear is on the outside of the shoe, away from the middle of your body, is very likely a retained Babinski reflex. That's where you're putting your force. And so the shoe is wearing more there.
Got it. And once again, people walk on the outsides of their feet or the insides of their feet. That can affect how the knee tracks, knee pain, how the hips are. You can look at hip pain. It can show up as lower back pain. All of this is going to track right up the body.
Absolutely. Yep. And let's just say that your retained Babinski reflex, it's retained left and right. But let's just say it's stronger on one side. That might be where your injury occurred.
Left and right, meaning both feet, or
Both
left
feet.
and right?
Yes, both feet, right? So it's
it.
retained in both feet. But one foot has a much stronger retention or expression than the other.
Right.
Now what happens is my weight has shifted. My pelvis has shifted in its balance. And I can wind up doing things like causing scoliosis from a retained Babinski reflex.
Got it.
Right? Or I can shift the teeth, or I can shift the eyes. Again, coming from how my feet interact with the ground.
That makes sense. Well, this goes back to our early Ask Dr. Beck shows where you were talking about tensegrity structure and how the body distributes that tension based on how the structure is affected.
Yes, correct.
Okay, are we next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
So this one kind of corresponds with the Chinese acupuncture point kidney 1. And it's a reflex that's called the crossed extensor reflex. So it teaches us part of how to walk. What we're looking at here is the right foot on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
If that reflex gets stimulated, the left knee bends. Which is kind of cool. So this is the way you think about it. The moment I step on the ground with my right foot, my left leg is already moving up and out toward the next step,
Mm-hmm.
which is really cool when you think about how to teach someone how to walk. We install a reflex that causes it to happen automatically. For me, when this reflex is active, the muscles that make up the bottom of the foot are tight when you're laying on your back.
Okay.
So if we follow through the logic, if you are laying down on your back, your foot is hanging in whatever your neutral is. Theoretically, every muscle in the foot should be relaxed. You're not using it. You're not moving it. It's just hanging out in space. So if I put my fingers on your foot and I start pushing around on those muscles gently, and I find muscles that are tight in a pattern, those tight muscles can tell me what's going on reflexively in the foot.
Mm.
And the way that I figure that out is I treat the reflex, never touch the foot, and the muscles relax. So if it was a problem within the foot itself, at least the logic would state I'd have to do something within the foot to get those muscles to relax.
Mm-hmm. So it's like hitting the first domino. You address the reflex that's causing everything else to be tight. And then by the reflex letting go, everything else begins to let go too.
Great analogy. Yes.
Okay, next slide.
Yes. Okay, so this one, we have two different grasp reflexes. One of them is called the palmar grasp and relates to the palm of the hand. So in a little one, when you take your finger as an adult and you place it in their very tiny hand, they reflexively do this. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the reflex integrates and goes away. Well, the foot has exactly the same reflex. So we would share this with apes, for example, where we primarily keep our hands grasping things and our feet primarily flat. Apes will grasp with both.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to know how to hang on to a branch or mom, for example, the moment they're born. So this is a plantar, bottom surface of the foot, grasp reflex. And what it's going to do is basically curl your toes. Okay, so in us, that's what would happen. The way it shows up for me is where the toes join the foot, there's tension because you've got the reflex trying to bend the toes and your brain going, no, I need these flat to be able to walk. So there's muscle tension that's in between.
Mm-hmm.
Treat the reflex, the muscle tension goes away.
I'm thinking hammer toes in people.
Absolutely.
That's how that would show up, and then well, from there,
Yes.
everything would be all the way up the body as far as how you're walking as a result of the hammer.
Correct. Yep.
The toes being curled like that.
Yes, agreed.
Okay. So we had
5 reflexes.
5. Oh, okay. There were 5.
Yep.
Okay. Retain reflexes in the foot. So the first one was a fear paralysis, and the Moro.
Those, if you have any of the retained reflexes in the foot, you also have to look for the fear paralysis in the Moro.
Okay. Okay. And then there's the
Stepping reflex,
stepping reflex,
heel reflex,
heel reflex. You got
the
the
Babinski reflex,
Yep.
cross extensor reflex,
cross extensor reflex, and then
the plantar grasp.
Plantar grasp. Got it. Okay. Perfect. Let me see. Let me get out of here. Where is... Stop sharing yet? And we're back. Okay. Well, for those that are watching the replay, make sure to give the video a thumbs up, like, and subscribe to the Comella Foundation channel. And then turn on notifications for future videos. If you'd like to submit questions, let's see. Jeez. That. Ask Dr. Beck. For if you'd like to submit questions for future episodes with Dr. Beck. Anything else that's coming to mind around the foot reflexes?
It, brother.
Yeah, it seems like the feet would be such a key role with what's going on in the rest of the body. Have you seen, is the ability of your treatments when you work with patients, do they hold better when the foot is treated as well? Or have you noticed, because the body's a tensegrity structure, we can start anywhere in there and it's going to affect the entire structure. Then I'm also thinking, when we're walking on our feet, when we go back, when we step into those old shoes that have those old patterns, when we step onto the feet that have these reflexes and we're moving and walking, then that's going to limit how much the structure is going to be able to integrate things.
Yes. So for me, during my treatment, I treat the foot if the body leads me there.
Okay.
Some people, their feet are not the thing to treat on the day they come in. We've got other things that the body needs to be addressed. If, however, your feet are playing even a tiny role in what's going on with your aches and pains and the mechanics of your body, I hear people say to me, hey, you know what? If I just walk from my car into the grocery store and back out to my car, I don't feel too bad. But, I did a 3-mile hike yesterday and now I have back pain.
Right.
What I heard them say is, I walked myself into pain. And then I go and I make sure that I check the feet for anything that might be hiding there, and I address that. And with the feet go the lower legs, the knee, the upper leg, the hip, the whole thing, because it all works together.
Right. And is there, what value do you put on, because when I work with clients, I have lots of people that'll completely ignore their body. And then it's like, I tiled for 8 hours on my knees and now my knees hurt. Okay. Got it. What if we broke that up? Working 60, 90 minutes at a time, and then you get up and you move around a little bit.
Correct.
How much does that play a role in a person being in pain or not in pain? To me, it's kind of a common sense kind of question. Well, if it hurts, don't do it. Unnecessarily hurts, don't do it. You know what I'm asking? It's
and you ask a very loaded question.
And I don't mean to. It's like, is it self-abuse? Like, is the person willingly or unconsciously going into like a self-abuse mode, or is it something that really needs to be addressed? So
Yes. Okay. I think I can come up with an answer that helps, or at least a way of thinking that might help explain it.
Okay.
So let's just say that you own two different vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
One of them a brand new car.
Mm-hmm.
One of them will make it 20, 25 years old and kind of beat up. Which one are you going to drive cross country with just those facts?
Right.
The brand new one or the one that's beat up? Okay.
No.
So for people who are in good physical shape, who are continually using their bodies in different ways, we could liken them to a new car.
Mm-hmm.
Things work pretty well. You're always checking in, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you are couch potato, weekend warrior, whatever, and you don't normally do these things, we liken you to the car that is older and very likely in less optimal mechanical shape.
Sure.
So if I rephrased this and I said, you've got a new car and a car that is in questionable shape, and you got to drive across the street, either one would work. You drive across town, maybe either one would work because it's a relatively short drive.
Mm-hmm.
You drive across the country and then you start questioning because you have to rely on it for a longer period of time. Now, if we go back to what you just said with those facts, if I'm someone who lays tile for a living and I am on my knees all of the time, I may have figured out how to make it comfortable for me to do that. Mm-hmm. If I am someone who has decided to redo my bathroom, I have never laid tile before, but I've watched a YouTube video, and I feel like I've got the skills to be decent at it. Mm-hmm. The idea here is your body's it's not set up to do 8 or 9 hours on your knees. Mm-hmm. You might even be better off doing 20 or 30 minutes and then taking a break and going for a short walk and coming back and repeating the 20 to 30 minutes.
Right.
So that's the logic behind it.
Sure. I got it. And I hear you. And I try to break things down to help people figure out where they're glitching.
Yes.
In their bodies,
Right.
And some of it is not even a physical thing. It's more of a mental approach to what they're doing that they can completely keep themselves out of pain.
Yes.
So, okay. I think we're going to call that one a day.
Cool.
If you'd like to submit questions to Dr. Beck, please go to the link below. It's also going to be in the description box as well on the Comella Foundation website. Charlie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your wisdom. Appreciate you very much.
Yep.
This is Bill Paravano, the Knee Pain Guru, signing off today for the Ask Dr. Beck show on behalf of the Comella Foundation. Have a great one. We'll see you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.